Lindo Zhang, The Red Candle. I once sacrificed my life to keep my parents' promise. This means nothing to you, because to you, promises mean nothing. A daughter can promise to come to dinner, but if she has a headache, if she has a traffic jam, if she wants to watch a favorite movie on TV, she no longer has a promise. I watched the same movie when you did not come. The American soldier promised us to come back and marry the girl. She is crying with a genuine feeling and he says, "Promise, promise, honey sweetheart. My promise is as good as gold." Then he pushes her onto the bed, but he doesn't come back. His gold is like yours. It is only 14 carats. To Chinese people, 14 carats isn't real gold. Feel my bracelets. They must be 24 carats, pure inside and out. It's too late to change you, but I'm telling you this because I worry about your baby. I worry that someday she will say, "Thank you, grandmother, for the gold bracelet. I'll never forget you." But later, she will forget her promise. She will forget she had a grandmother. In this same war movie, the American soldier goes home and he falls to his knees asking another girl to marry him. And the girl's eyes run back and forth, so shy, as if she had never considered this before. And suddenly, her eyes look straight down and she knows now she loves him, so much she wants to cry. "Yes," she says at last, and they marry forever. This was not my case. Instead, the village matchmaker came to my family when I was just 2 years old. No, nobody told me this. I remember it all. It was summertime, very hot and dusty outside, and I could hear cicadas crying in the yard. We were under some trees in our orchard. The servants and my brothers were picking pears high above me, and I was sitting in my mother's hot, sticky arms. I was waving my hand this way and that, because in front of me floated a small bird with horns and colorful paper-thin wings. And then the paper bird flew away, and in front of me were 2 ladies. I remember them because one lady made watery shh sounds. When I was older, I came to recognize this as a Peking accent, which sounds quite strange to Taiyuan people's ears. The 2 ladies were looking at my face without talking. The lady with the watery voice had a painted face that was melting. The other lady had the dry face of an old tree trunk. She looked first at me, then at the painted lady. Of course, now I know the tree trunk lady was the old village matchmaker, and the other was Huang Tai Tai, the mother of the boy I would be forced to marry. No, it's not true what some Chinese say about girl babies being worthless. It depends on what kind of girl baby you are. In my case, people could see my value. I looked and smelled like a precious bun cake, sweet, with a good clean color. The matchmaker bragged about me. "An earth horse for an earth sheep. This is the best marriage combination." She patted my arm and I pushed her hand away. Huang Tai Tai whispered in her sure voice that perhaps I had an unusually bad Pi-Chi, a bad temper. But the matchmaker laughed and said, "Not so, not so. She is a strong horse. She will grow up to be a hard worker who serves you well in your old age." And this is when Huang Tai Tai looked down at me with a cloudy face, as though she could penetrate my thoughts and see my future intentions. I will never forget her look. Her eyes opened wide. She searched my face carefully and then she smiled. I could see a large gold tooth staring at me like the blinding sun, and then the rest of her teeth opened wide as if she were going to swallow me down in one piece. This is how I became betrothed to Huang Tai Tai's son, who I later discovered was just a baby, 1 year younger than I. His name was Tian Yu, Tian for sky, because he was so important, and Yu meaning leftovers, because when he was born, his father was very sick and his family thought he might die. Tian Yu would be the leftover of his father's spirit, but his father lived and his grandmother was scared the ghosts would turn their attention to this baby boy and take him instead. So they watched him carefully, made all his decisions, and he became very spoiled. But even if I had known I was getting such a bad husband, I had no choice, now or later. That was how backward families in the country were. We were always the last to give up stupid old-fashioned customs. In other cities already, a man could choose his own wife, with his parents' permission, of course. But we were cut off from this type of new thought. You never heard if ideas were better in another city, only if they were worse. We were told stories of sons who were so influenced by bad wives that they threw their old, crying parents out into the street. So, Taiyuanese mothers continued to choose their daughters-in-law, ones who would raise proper sons, care for the old people, and faithfully sweep the family burial grounds long after the old ladies had gone to their graves. Because I was promised to the Huang's son for marriage, my own family began treating me as if I belonged to somebody else. My mother would say to me when the rice bowl went up to my face too many times, "Look how much Huang Tai-Tai's daughter can eat." My mother did not treat me this way because she didn't love me. She would say this, biting back her tongue, so she wouldn't wish for something that was no longer hers. I was actually a very obedient child, but sometimes I had a sour look on my face, only because I was hot or tired or very ill. This is when my mother would say, "Such an ugly face. The Huangs won't want you, and our whole family will be disgraced." And I would cry more to make my face uglier. "It's no use," my mother would say. "We have made a contract. It cannot be broken." And I would cry even harder. I didn't see my future husband until I was 8 or 9. The world that I knew was our family compound in the village outside of Taiyuan. My family lived in a modest 2-story house with a smaller house in the same compound, which was really just 2 side-by-side rooms for our cook, an everyday servant, and their families. Our house sat on a little hill. We called this hill 3 Steps to Heaven, but it was really just centuries of hardened layers of mud washed up by the Fen River. On the east wall of our compound was the river, which my father said liked to swallow little children. He said it had once swallowed the whole town of Taiyuan. The river ran brown in the summer. In the winter, the river was blue-green in the narrow, fast-moving spots. In the wider places, it was frozen still, white with cold. Oh, I can remember the new year when my family went to the river and caught many fish, giant slippery creatures plucked while they were still sleeping in their frozen riverbeds, so fresh that even after they were gutted they would dance on their tails when thrown into the hot pan. That was also the year I first saw my husband as a little boy. When the firecrackers went off, he cried loud, "Wah!" with a big open mouth, even though he was not a baby. Later I would see him at red egg ceremonies when 1-month-old boy babies were given their real names. He would sit on his grandmother's old knees, almost cracking them with his weight. And he would refuse to eat everything offered to him, always turning his nose away, as though someone were offering him a stinky pickle and not a sweet cake. So I didn't have instant love for my future husband the way you see on television today. I thought of this boy more like a troublesome cousin. I learned to be polite to the Huangs and especially to Huang Tai-Tai. My mother would push me toward Huang Tai-Tai and say, "What do you say to your mother?" And I would be confused, not knowing which mother she meant. So I would turn to my real mother and say, "Excuse me, Ma." And then I would turn to Huang Tai-Tai and present her with a little goodie to eat, saying, "For you, mother." I remember it was once a lump of siu mai, a little dumpling I loved to eat. My mother told Huang Tai-Tai I had made this dumpling especially for her, even though I had only poked its steamy sides with my finger when the cook poured it onto the serving plate. My life changed completely when I was 12, the summer the heavy rains came. The Fen River, which ran through the middle of my family's land, flooded the plains. It destroyed all the wheat my family had planted that year and made the land useless for years to come. Even our house on top of the little hill became unlivable. When we came down from the 2nd story, we saw the floors and furniture were covered with sticky mud. The courtyards were littered with uprooted trees, broken bits of walls, and dead chickens. We were so poor in all this mess. You couldn't go to an insurance company back then and say, Somebody did this damage. Pay me $1 million. In those days, you were unlucky if you had exhausted your own possibilities. My father said we had no choice but to move the family to Wuxi, to the south near Shanghai, where my mother's brother owned a small flour mill. My father explained that the whole family, except for me, would leave immediately. I was 12 years old enough to separate from my family and live with the Huangs. The roads were so muddy and filled with giant potholes that no truck was willing to come to the house. All the heavy furniture and bedding had to be left behind, and these were promised to the Huangs as my dowry. In this way, my family was quite practical. The dowry was enough, more than enough, said my father. But he could not stop my mother from giving me her chang, a necklace made out of a tablet of red jade. When she put it around my neck, she acted very stern, so I knew she was very sad. "Obey your family. Do not disgrace us," she said. "Act happy when you arrive. Really, you are very lucky." The Huang's house also sat next to the river. While our house had been flooded, their house was untouched. This is because their house sat higher up in the valley, and this was the first time I realized the Huangs had a much better position than my family. They looked down on us, which made me understand why Huang Tai Tai and Tian Yu had such long noses. When I passed under the Huang's stone and wood gateway arch, I saw a large courtyard with 3 or 4 rows of small, low buildings. Some were for storing supplies, others for servants and their families. Behind these modest buildings stood the main house. I walked closer and stared at the house that would be my home for the rest of my life. The house had been in the family for many generations. It was not really so old or remarkable, but I could see it had grown up along with the family. There were 4 stories, one for each generation: great-grandparents, grandparents, parents, and children. The house had a confused look. It had been hastily built, and then rooms and floors and wings and decorations had been added on in every which manner, reflecting too many opinions. The first level was built of river rocks, held together by straw-filled mud. The second and third levels were made of smooth bricks with an exposed walkway to give it the look of a palace tower. And the top level had gray slab walls topped with a red tile roof. To make the house seem important, there were 2 large round pillars holding up a veranda entrance to the front door. These pillars were painted red, as were the wooden window borders. Someone, probably Huang Tai Tai, had added imperial dragon heads at the corners of the roof. Inside, the house held a different kind of pretense. The only nice room was a parlor on the first floor, which the Huangs used to receive guests. This room contained tables and chairs carved out of red lacquer, fine pillows embroidered with the Huang family name in the ancient style, and many precious things that gave the look of wealth and old prestige. The rest of the house was plain and uncomfortable and noisy, with the complaints of 20 relatives. I think with each generation the house had grown smaller inside, more crowded. Each room had been cut in half to make 2. No big celebration was held when I arrived. Huang Tai Tai didn't have red banners greeting me in the fancy room on the first floor. Tian Yi was not there to greet me. Instead, Huang Tai Tai hurried me upstairs to the second floor and into the kitchen, which was a place where family children didn't usually go. This was a place for cooks and servants, so I knew my standing. That first day, I stood in my best padded dress at the low wooden table and began to chop vegetables. I could not keep my hands steady. I missed my family, and my stomach felt bad, knowing I had finally arrived where my life said I belonged. But I was also determined to honor my parents' words, so Huang Tai Tai could never accuse my mother of losing face. She would not win that from our family. As I was thinking this, I saw an old servant woman stooping over the same low table gutting a fish, looking at me from the corner of her eye. I was crying and I was afraid she would tell Huang Tai Tai. So I gave a big smile and shouted, "What a lucky girl I am! I'm going to have the best life!" And in this quick-thinking way, I must have waved my knife too close to her nose because she cried angrily, "什么笨的人! What kind of fool are you?" And I knew right away this was a warning. because when I shouted that declaration of happiness, I almost tricked myself into thinking it might come true. I saw Tianyu at the evening meal. I was still a few inches taller than he, but he acted like a big warlord. I knew what kind of husband he would be because he made special efforts to make me cry. He complained the soup was not hot enough, and then spilled the bowl as if it were an accident. He waited until I had sat down to eat, and then would demand another bowl of rice. He asked why I had such an unpleasant face when looking at him. Over the next few years, Huang Tai instructed the other servants to teach me how to sew sharp corners on pillowcases and to embroider my future family's name. How can a wife keep her husband's household in order if she has never dirtied her own hands? Huang Tai used to say as she introduced me to a new task. I don't think Huang Tai ever soiled her hands, but she was very good at calling out orders and criticism. Teach her to wash rice properly so that the water runs clear. Her husband cannot eat muddy rice, she'd said to a cook servant. Another time she told a servant to show me how to clean a chamber pot. Make her put her own nose to the barrel to make sure it's clean. That was how I learned to be an obedient wife. I learned to cook so well that I could smell if the meat stuffing was too salty before I even tasted it. I could sew such small stitches it looked as if the embroidery had been painted on. And even Huang Tai complained in a pretend manner that she could scarcely throw a dirty blouse on the floor before it was cleaned and on her back once again, causing her to wear the same clothes every day. After a while, I didn't think it was a terrible life. No, not really. After a while, I hurt so much I didn't feel any difference. What was happier than seeing everybody gobble down the shiny mushrooms and bamboo shoots I had helped to prepare that day? What was more satisfying than having Huang Tai nod and pat my head when I had finished combing her hair 100 strokes? How much happier could I be after seeing Tianyu eat a whole bowl of noodles without once complaining about its taste or my looks? It's like those ladies you see on American TV these days. The ones who are so happy they have washed out a stain so the clothes look better than new. Can you see how the Huangs almost washed their thinking into my skin? I came to think of Tianyu as a god, someone whose opinions were worth much more than my own life. I came to think of Huang Tai as my real mother, someone I wanted to please, someone I should follow and obey without question. When I turned 16 on the Lunar New Year, Huang Tai told me she was ready to welcome a grandson by next spring. Even if I had not wanted to marry, where would I go live instead? Even though I was strong as a horse, how could I run away? The Japanese were in every corner of China. The Japanese showed up as uninvited guests, said Tianyu's grandmother. And that's why nobody else came. Huang Tai had made elaborate plans, but our wedding was very small. She had asked the entire village and friends and family from other cities as well. In those days, you didn't do RSVP. It was not polite not to come. Huang Tai didn't think the war would change people's good manners, so the cook and her helpers prepared hundreds of dishes. My family's old furniture had been shined up into an impressive dowry and placed in the front parlor. Huang Tai had taken care to remove all the water and mud marks. She had even commissioned someone to write felicitous messages on red banners, as if my parents themselves had draped these decorations to congratulate me on my good luck. And she had arranged to rent a red palanquin to carry me from her neighbor's house to the wedding ceremony. A lot of bad luck fell on our wedding day, even though the matchmaker had chosen a lucky day. The 15th day of the 8th moon, when the moon is perfectly round and bigger than any other time of the year. But the week before the moon arrived, the Japanese came. They invaded Shanxi province, as well as the provinces bordering us. People were nervous, and the morning of the 15th, on the day of the wedding celebration, it began to rain, a very bad sign. When the thunder and lightning began, people confused it with Japanese bombs and would not leave their houses. I heard later that poor Huang Tai waited many hours for more people to come, and finally, When she could not wring any more guests out of her hands, she decided to start the ceremony. What could she do? She could not change the wall. I was at the neighbor's house when they called me to come down and ride the red palanquin. I was sitting at a small dressing table by an open window. I began to cry and thought bitterly